So now you understand how arrays work, how variables work, and how expressions treat value and their initial values and keyframes. So now I think you're actually pretty ready to go out and start working on your own with expressions. But for now, let's take a look at the functionality that's built into After Effects that allows you to do some advanced stuff without having to do some complicated math or anything. Now, the first most common expression that you will use inside After Effects, wiggle. And let's put some brackets in there too. And just to keep things nice and fancy, let's use a little programmy kind of looking font like a courier. And so this is wiggle. Wiggle basically takes whatever value your property has and just gives it a little shake. So let's go to the position property. As before, we have this sort of animation. It's sliding in and fading in at the same time. I'm going to hold down Alt, click on the stopwatch, and that's going to bring out all the stuff we are used to now. Transformed position is in there. And we're going to now define wiggle. So let's do wiggle, place two brackets and a semicolon at the end. And then in between the two brackets, we need to define two things. Is the frequency. How often or how quickly do you want your particular layer to shake? Let's go with 5. And then I'll add a comma, and we need to define the second value, and that is by how much. So since we're putting this in position, we want it to wiggle 5 times per second, and it's going to do 250 pixels as the that's the range that it's going to apply to. So once I click away, you'll see the layer moves to the side, and if I move the time, you'll see now it's just shaking all over the place. Now there's a few things to note about how wiggle works. First off, we've put 5, which is how fast it's going. So let's do, say, 0.2. And now when we play it out, you'll see it's moving a lot slower. In fact, it's barely visible. And if we change this to, say, something like 60, it's just going to be a real headache, and it's just going to be all over the place. And notice the 250 that it's moving is also kind of throwing it out of the window. But it won't use 250 every single time. It's going to use a maximum and a minimum of 250, of plus 250 and minus 250. So it's just going to shake this guy around all over the place at the frequency you set and at the amount you set. So if I set this, say, to 0, it's just going to move it out. There's no frequency anymore, so it's just going to do it, just set that value once and it's done. Set a lower value, it's going to be slower, set a higher value, and so on. Wiggle applies to anything, and I mean anything. You can put it on scale and it's going to work. Let's do 2 by 100, and it's going to do its thing. As you can see, it's now wiggling all the dimensions separately, both X and Y, and that's pretty funky. Let's remove this. We can add it to opacity, and you'll see the opacity kind of still happens. It's still going to try and fade in, but the wiggle is going to apply to the keyframes as well. So wiggle actually takes into account what the original value was. So if you put it on position, you'll see it's just going to wiggle around, but you can kind of still see the vertical movement that we have from the keyframe. Maybe I should turn this down to, say, 10. And you'll see we still have the vertical movement from before, but now there's a little wiggle added on top. So that's pretty nice. Wiggle is very useful, very powerful. It's probably the most used expression if you're ever going to get into using them all the time. So let's take a quick look at something that wiggle does. We now know how arrays work. We now know how variables work. So let's try and apply that in this case. So I'm going to define a variable. So we'll call this shaker, and we'll say wiggle 1, 200, and then we'll say shaker. And that's just going to do the usual. It's just going to stick the wiggle in there. But what if I wanted it to shake both X and Y by the same amount? So to lock this, we're going to go to shaker. We're going to add a array. So let's add a box, square bracket at the beginning and at the end. And now we're going to tell it to only refer to the X of shaker. So shaker is going to be, we add a bracket there, 0, and that's going to be the X. And then we can come in here and do shaker, bracket 0 as well. And this is going to apply the X value that the shaker is giving to the 2 dimensions. So now it scales at the same rate. Alternatively, we can remove these zeros here and do it how the After Effects automatically does it by putting that over here. So square bracket 0, close square bracket, and it still works the same way. So now they do it evenly. The same applies to position and anything else with multiple dimensions that you'd want to tweak. So yeah, like I said, arrays and variables are very important. You could just as easily make this 1 and 200 to be variables, but that's a bit too much. Okay, cool. So now we've figured out how wiggle works. Let's take a look at another nice expression, which is loopOut. So I'm going to change this to loopOut. Same, it needs 2 brackets. Let me just make it a little bit smaller. And actually, let me just remove the scaling so that now we're back to before. Oh, we have opacity as well. So now we're back to before. So what loopOut does is allows you to actually loop things. So let me remove this opacity because it might get a little distracting. Let me just put an expression saying 100 to keep it at full opacity, so I don't have to lose my keyframes, and the positioning is still happening. So I'll alt click on position, and I'll just type out loopOut, open bracket, and close it. And this is one of the few ones that you can actually have 2 brackets with nothing in between, but the brackets still need to be there nonetheless. So let me click away, and what's going to happen now is it's going to slide up, and then slide up, and then slide up, and it's just going to keep doing this indefinitely until the comp is over. And that can be useful and something you just need repeating a few times. Let me give it some more time so that it makes more sense. So it's just going to keep doing that over and over and over. Now, loopOut also has a few parameters that you can throw in just to give it more to work with. So inside the brackets, we're going to add quotation marks. And in between those quotation marks, we're going to add the words cycle. And when you click away, it's going to stay the same. So cycle is just going to keep repeating what it had going on. The other one is ping pong, which is just going to work like the ping pong game. It's going to go back and forth. It's going to go down, back up, down, back up, down. So it's kind of like cycle, but the opposite way. And then you also have continue. And what continue does is, I have a keyframe here slowing this down. I have an ease keyframe here slowing it down, so I'm going to just reset that. And what continue does is just basically maintains the speed of the layer and just lets it go off wherever it's going to end up. This is pretty useful if you have something you need to continue continuously. And since it's based on speed, if you bring this closer together, it's going to go faster. If you bring it wider, it's going to go slower. I like to use continue for especially credits. So you just have a whole bunch of text and you just need it moving up and just going and going and going until the end of the composition. Just put 2 keyframes moving up, add in loopOut continue, and then if you need it faster, you can just change the spacing between these or, or increase. Entirely up to you. So there you go. LoopOut continue. Very nice. LoopOut also has a second value that you can apply. I'm going to leave that to you to go out and find out exactly how that works. Cool. So let's go on to the next one, which is time. And time is pretty fun. I like to use this with, say, rotation. So let's go to the rotation property. I'm going to hit R, and we now have this guy sliding up. I really want to keep that easing from before, so I'm just going to add it back in so that it looks a bit cleaner. I'll return the opacity animation. There we go. Okay, cool. So let's take a look at how we can use time. So with time is basically the current time where the time indicator is in seconds. It's very important that it's in seconds, not frames. So even though your mode is set to frames here, I'm at 66 frames, it's still going to use seconds. So let me hit R. That's going to show my rotation. I'll alt click on Z rotation, and I'm going to do time times 200. So what happens now is that it's going to just keep rotating and rotating, and it's going to multiply the current time by 200 in order to get you your value. So you'll see here at 0, we're at 0. If you go to 1 second, you'll see we're at 200. You go to 2 seconds, we'll be at 400, which is 360. 360 plus 40 is 400. You know, that one there kind of gets a bit annoying, but that's how that works. So it's going to just keep spinning indefinitely based on the time. We can also do the same to say position. So for this one, obviously we need an array. So we'll do value plus. Actually, you know what? These keyframes are kind of make things messy. So let's do this in scale. So I'll go to scale, alt click, and we'll go time times 200. Actually 100. And what's gonna happen is whoa, error. What's this error? Let's see. Error at line 0 property scale in comp 1 expression result must be dimension 3, not 1. So we've done time times 200. That's gonna give only a single number. So what it's saying is that we need to do an array. So let's do time times 100, comma, time times 100. Probably should define that as a variable, but it's all right. So what's gonna happen now is it now just keeps scaling non-stop. We have the position animation happening, we have the fading happening, but now because time is multiplying the scale, it's just gonna keep scaling up and up and up and up and up. All right, and then so the cool thing with this is that we can set this to 300, and now the Y is gonna scale a lot faster than the X. So pretty awesome. So that's how time works. You can use it to make things happen continuously. You can manipulate time to make your expression switch on and off once you get to that level. All right, cool. So that we've looked at time, loop out, and wiggle. In the next video, we'll take a look at a few more examples, a little more advanced. That's gonna be value at time and index and a bunch of others. And I think after that, you should be good to go in using expressions in your own projects. So thanks for watching. Go ahead and mess around with loop out, time, wiggle, see what you can do, mess around with the arrays and the variables, just put together everything you've learned and see how you can just mash it up and make some really awesome expressions. So until then, enjoy, and I'll see you in the next video.